case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia does not have to do with MS-13. If you listen to President Trump and the Trump administration, you would think that the U.S. courts have found that Mr. Abrego Garcia is part of MS-13, but in fact, they have not found that. In fact, recently a U.S. federal court judge said that the Trump administration did not have evidence to support the claim that he had ever been part of MS-13. In fact, Mr. Abrego Garcia is legally in the United States. In fact, an immigration judge found years ago that it would put his life in danger if he was returned to El Salvador.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador and met with the country's vice president to push for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a man who was sent there by the Trump administration in March despite an immigration court order preventing his deportation. Van Hollen said at a news conference in San Salvador that Vice President Félix Ulloa said his government could not return Abrego Garcia to the United States and declined to allow Van Hollen to visit him in the notorious gang prison where he is being held. Why is the government of El Salvador continuing to imprison a man where they have no evidence that he's committed any crime, and they have not been provided any evidence from the United States that he has committed any crime? Van Hollen told reporters after the meeting they should just let him go. Van Hollen's trip became a flashpoint in the U.S. The Trump administration sharply criticized it, while Democrats have rallied around Abrego Garcia. President Donald Trump and Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele said this week that they have no basis to send him back, even as the U.S. Supreme Court has called on the administration to facilitate his return. Trump officials have said that Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran citizen who was living in Maryland, has ties to the MS-13 gang. But his attorneys say the government has provided no evidence of that, and Abrego Garcia has never been charged with any crime related to such activity.
So I just met with the Vice President of El Salvador. I'm grateful for the meeting. The president is out of the country at this time. So I appreciated the chance to talk to the Vice President about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And we started the conversation on a point of agreement, which is that our two countries should work together to crack down on transnational gangs like MS-13. And I told the Vice President that for over 2 decades, I have worked in my state of Maryland to crack down on MS-13 and look forward to further efforts to make sure that we crack down on violent gangs. I think that's important to underscore because the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia does not have to do with MS-13. If you listen to President Trump and the Trump administration, you would think that the U.S. courts have found that Mr. Abrego Garcia is part of MS-13, but in fact, they have not found that. In fact, recently a U.S. federal court judge said that the Trump administration did not have evidence to support the claim that he had ever been part of MS-13. In fact, Mr. Abrego Garcia is legally in the United States. In fact, an immigration judge found years ago that it would put his life in danger if he was returned to El Salvador. And so he was given protective status and a work permit. And by the way, that was done during the last Trump administration, the last time President Trump was in office, and they never appealed that decision. So I want to emphasize that President Trump and our Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Vice President of the United States are lying when they say that Abrego Garcia has been charged with a crime or is part of MS-13. That is a lie. And this is a lie to cover up what they did. So what did they do? So they illegally abducted Mr. Abrego Garcia from Maryland and sent him to CCOT, which is a notorious prison here in El Salvador. In fact, it's a prison where they say they send the worst of the worst, right? That's where they send the terrorists. Now, the courts of the United States have said there's no evidence to support the charge that he's part of MS-13. So I asked the vice president whether or not El Salvador has any evidence that he's part of MS-13 or has committed a crime. So I asked the vice president if Abrego Garcia has not committed a crime and the U.S. courts have found that he was illegally taken from the United States, and the government of El Salvador has no evidence that he was part of MS-13, why is El Salvador continuing to hold him in CCOT? And his answer was that the Trump administration is paying El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, to keep him at CCOT. And I pointed out that neither the government of El Salvador nor the Trump administration has presented evidence to support the claim that he's committed any kind of criminal acts. And so why not release Abrego Garcia today? And he said what President Bukele said the other day at the White House, which that El Salvador can't smuggle Mr. Abrego Garcia into the United States. And I said, I'm not asking him to smuggle Mr. Abrego Garcia into the United States. I'm simply asking him to open the door of CCOT and let this innocent man walk out. And I pointed out that the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, has said that the United States would send a plane to El Salvador to pick him up. And why did she do that? Because the Supreme Court of the United States, in a ruling of 9-0, has said that the Trump administration has to facilitate his return to the United States. Now, there's no evidence that the Trump administration is complying with that order. There's no evidence that they're complying with that order. In fact, the United States Embassy here has told me they've received no direction from the Trump administration to help facilitate his release. So the Trump administration is clearly in violation of American court orders. But that still leaves the question, why is the government of El Salvador continuing to imprison a man where they have no evidence he's committed any crime and they've not been provided any evidence from the United States that he's committed a crime? So they should just let him go. And they should let him go, and we will find a way to get him from San Salvador to Maryland, the state of Maryland. Because I promised his wife Jennifer, and his mother and his brother and their family, because he has 3 children. Some of them have severe disabilities. I promised them that I would do everything I could to get him out of CCOT. And I won't stop trying, and I can assure the president, the vice president, that I may be the first United States senator to visit El Salvador on this issue, but there will be more, and there will be more members of Congress coming. This is an unsustainable and unjust moment, so it cannot continue this way. I also told his wife and family that I would try to meet with Mr. Abrego Garcia while I was here.